Jerry Marshall is a kingdom entrepreneur who's set up many successful commercial impact and social businesses, creating hundreds of jobs, particularly among disadvantaged groups. He's also spent a lifetime helping others set up their own small business or social enterprises, including writing a practical book, Mind Your Own Business. Love that. That's so good. Available online free of charge together with podcasts and templates. I think this is going to be so informative. This is going to help you so much. So yeah, let's lean in that post-lunch lull. Let's get loads of questions in there. Jerry, we're going to introduce you now. If this old technical thing works, Jerry's going to come in on the screen in a few short moments. Can't wait to be hearing from him. Amazing. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, excellent. It's always the nervous moment. Will the technology actually work?
Who knows? Who knows? But we're here. Thanks so much for being with us. And I'll pass on to you now, Jerry.
Great. No, thank you very much, Sat. It's really, really good to be here. We're a few minutes by my clock early, so there may be other people joining. But let me at least say what the session's about, so so you know whether to stay or to move on. So this is really about particularly for people who've always dreamed of setting up a business, but are not quite sure how. But it might also be relevant to business advisors or to people already running a business. And it kind of includes really, I see myself as a kingdom entrepreneur, and that covers the whole spectrum from church planting through to social enterprise through to commercial businesses. So if you're an entrepreneur, and there was a good session on what is an entrepreneur a bit earlier on, then I hope you find that this talk helpful. Let me also give a bit of background. I'm hesitating slightly because I'm hoping one or two people might turn up at 1:45, but welcome for those that are listening. But it might be helpful just to know that I've been there, got the t-shirt and all of that. My business experience as an adult, first business at school, but as an adult, I started as a self-employed consultant, advising dozens of businesses and charities on marketing strategy, research-based marketing strategy. And that became a partnership and then a limited company. And it became a platform for a social enterprise working with long-term unemployed people in Coventry. And then for a technology business that I, with others, grew and sold. So that's enabled me to do the stuff that I'm doing, do the stuff that God is calling me to do without being constrained by money, which is great. And then I set up an impact business, so a for-profit business, but the prime purpose is not profit. That's just financial sustainability. And the aim was to create jobs and skills in an area with 50% unemployment in Bethlehem in Palestine, create jobs and skills and to model business integrity and gender equality. It's called Transcend because it's about transcending the divide and movement restrictions. So that now employs 170 people in Bethlehem, and I'm just amazed what God has done. It feels it's very much God's thing. And I also set up a business to do with campaigning against HS2. And then finally, a charity last year called Transformational Enterprise Network, which is really a community with slightly monastic, kind of virtual monastic stuff around it. Community of business people who want to use business to alleviate poverty. So what I'm trying to say is I think I've started every sort of business that there is. So do ask me questions about it or connect with me afterwards. This half an hour is attempting to condense about 10 hours of a course from something called Mind Your Own Business, as Sat's mentioned, which is available free at mindyourownbusiness.uk, free as a download anyway, and there are templates to do with it. And people have been very kind about it being very helpful as the nuts and bolts of actually setting up a business, all the practicalities for setting up a small business, self-employment, employing a few people. If you're looking for a couple of million in venture capital, then talk to me afterwards, but that's a slightly different kind of setup. So this book is divided into 3 sections. The first section is very short and is really starts off with the bigger picture. which is my belief that business is transformational. Christians can be suspicious of business for all sorts of reasons, but 3 thoughts. First of all, business can only succeed in the long term when it adds value to customers, and indeed when people want to work for it and all the rest of it. I know there are exceptions, but there isn't time to go into those. Secondly, business is the long-term solution to poverty. In my lifetime, extreme poverty in the world has diminished from over 50% of the population to under 10%. And that's mainly because of enterprise in Asia, not charitable giving in Africa. Again, there are lots of question marks about that, and issues about inequality at the extreme end, and all sorts of stuff. But there isn't time for that. Another time. And thirdly, kingdom business run as ministry, can change culture. We can be salt and light in a culture which is often a long way from kingdom values. It varies widely across different sizes of business and different industries and different countries. But when, and I've done this, when you've turned down a bribe or when you've turned down a potential customer where you could do the business because that doesn't fit in with your ethical and Christian values, people are shocked, and it really makes them think. So we can be culture changers. The second part, section 1, is about you. Why do you want to start a business? How does it fit into God's call on your life? And are you looking at, what sort of business are you looking at? I'll come on to that. Is it about generating an income, or is it about the flexibility from self-employment, say, or is it because there's a particular social need that you want to meet in a financially sustainable way? And, what are the personal qualities needed? What do you need to prepare for as an individual starting a business? So that's section 1. Section 2 is the core, and we'll come to that. That's most of the talk. But just in passing, let me say section 3 is really about when you're already running a business, here's some useful resources and thoughts. It's about building a website, developing sales, about promotion, reporting, things I find boring like compliance, but you have to do it, information security, customer research, a strategy for long-term growth, exporting and selling the business, which is also a fun point. And I'm not going to talk about those, but it's there in the book for free for reference. So section 2 is divided into 10 subsections, and sometimes I've done it as a course, sort of 10 sessions over Zoom. I'll probably do that again, and it's been done all over the place, all over the world indeed. And that's what I'm going to attempt to cover in the remaining 30 minutes or so. The first question is, what business is the right business for you to start? And kind of a starting point of that is back to, what are you looking for? Is it a hobby business, just turning a hobby into a bit of a source of income? Is it about selling your skills and your time, being self-employed? Or would you want to set up from the outset to employ people to create jobs? Or is it a social enterprise? And then the next stage is, what's the right business for you, unless it's already determined by those things. You want to meet this need, long-term unemployment or something. An approach is to write a list of all the groups of people you know, all the people groups. So there might be people in your area, might be people through your church, might be people through where you currently work, that business estate, might be people through the badminton club or whatever it is that you're involved in. Think of all those people groups and then think about their needs. If you happen to know a lot of people with young kids, what are their needs? What could you supply? That's one list. Second list is, what are your abilities? And I don't just mean what qualifications have you got, but if you're good at organising a big party, then you have event organising abilities. And if you think about it for long enough, you'll probably realise you've got a lot of really good skills. Are you good at talking to people, helping people open out? Are you good at networking? All these things are potentially valuable. What are your abilities? What are your resources? Do you have a car? That could be useful. A garage? Maybe there are particular things that you've got that could be a useful resource. And then write a list of what you enjoy doing. What would you spend all day doing, even if you weren't being paid for it? And then look at those 3 lists and see where the commonality is. Is there a link? Is there something that you'll enjoy doing, that you've got the resources and abilities to do, and that connects with one of the groups of people that you know? And also, what is God saying? And there have been particular instances, the company in Bethlehem, where I feel it's 100% this was God's idea. It was a completely crazy, stupidly risky idea, but God said, do it. And it nearly went bust in the first year, but because it was God's business, it was fine, and everything was sorted. So, what is God saying? That's the first section. Having come up with the idea, all of the rest of section 2 is about things you can do before you start spending money, or any significant money, to check whether your business idea is viable. So you probably have a short list maybe of 2 or 3 business ideas. Start with one and work through the things I'm going to say for that business idea to figure out whether it's viable. Because potentially you could just lose a load of money because you haven't really done the sums beforehand. And I've had a couple of people work through a business idea and at the end of it say, thank goodness I did that course, because I realized that I would have lost a lot of money in this business. So that's what most of the next sections are about. First of all, market research, researching your business idea. And a good shortcut is competitor research. Who are your competitors? Really, who are your competitors? And actually, don't just think of the obvious ones. If you say, what's Coca-Cola's competitor? Because everyone thinks it's Pepsi-Cola. And in a way, that's true. But actually, water is the biggest competitor for Coca-Cola. There's an alternative, which is free, and it's very thirst-quenching. So it's not necessarily the obvious competitors. And then think about how they're succeeding. What does that competitor do that enables it to attract customers? Why are they being successful, assuming they are being successful? And how can you find out more? Well, you can find out a lot from their website, of course, but if you can, maybe you can go and try it out. You can't do that with all businesses, but many businesses, you can go and experience their service or their product and see what you think. Perhaps some of the other services or products in that sector. Try it out. Maybe ask other people. If it's a business, a shop, that kind of environment, you could hang around outside the shop and ask people who are using it. Say, really interested to know why you use that particular shop, that particular provider of the service. And if your business is going to be quite local, you're only really targeting your local town, perhaps there are other businesses in the sector in a different town, so they're not going to be a competitor. And you may well find they're happy to talk to you about what works and what doesn't work. And so check out your competitors and think about no, I'll come back to that. I'll move on to section 3. So you've thought about competitors, you've got an idea of what the business is about, what prices they charge, that kind of thing. Now think about your customers. Who are your customers? And first question is, are you selling direct to your customers, or are you selling trade, perhaps to a shop or through some kind of distributor? Because that makes a difference. What the distributor is looking for will be different from what the end consumer is looking for. Let's assume for the moment that you're selling direct to the consumer of the product or service. Think about who they are, who would buy the service or product you have in mind. You might immediately say, well, lots of people, anyone might be interested in this product, but who would be your really best customer that's most likely to go for it? Are they more likely to be women than men? Are they more likely to be older people or younger people? Do they need to be reasonably wealthy to afford it? Or is it something that everyone would go for? Do they have some particular characteristics? They own dogs, for example. What geography are they part of? Could it be anywhere in the world over the internet, or is it national or local? And think about why they might buy from you. People have said, and you might argue with this, that there are only 4 reasons why people buy: better, cheaper, faster, nicer. So people might buy from you because you are offering a better service or a better product than your competitors, and enough, sufficiently better for people to notice and turn to you. And that's fairly obvious. Quality. Cheaper. If you're significantly cheaper than the competition, that isn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily make a big difference, but it might do. I'll come back to that. Faster. Why do you use the supermarket that you use? Probably because it's the nearest. Not necessarily, but probably. Why do you choose a particular supplier? Maybe because it does next day delivery or whatever. So faster is a factor. And fourthly, and this is the one that's often missed, nicer. Why do you hire the plumber that you hire or the accountant that you hire? You probably don't know whether they're the cheapest on the market. And actually, do you want the cheapest plumber or the cheapest accountant? You probably don't know for sure whether they're the best. How can you really tell? But probably you've hired them because you like them, you trust them. In the case of someone who comes into your home and work, that you could leave them doing whatever they're doing and go out to the shops. You completely trust them. You get on with them. They'll sort out a problem. They'll respond. And I think self-employed people sometimes underestimate that, and they think that their customers are buying from them because they have excellent service or they're cheap. But actually, they just like you, and don't underestimate that. How much will they pay? This is often a difficult one for self-employed people who, and this is the big problem, you probably will be tempted to undercharge. It's the most common mistake, and I think I did it first as a self-employed person. I undercharged. I didn't really value my time enough, and that's partly self-confidence. Could I charge that amount? And partly perhaps not understanding that if you are working as, say, a consultant, that you don't get paid for all your hours. If you're doing really well, you might be paid for 2/3 of your hours, but that's quite good going. You've also got to spend time selling and doing the administration and maybe gaps between services. So have a think about what the competitors are charging. Also, if it's a product, look at the costs, or indeed if it's a service, so that you've got enough gap between the costs you pay and the price that is being paid, and we'll come back to finances later. And talk to customers, talk to potential customers to ask where they buy this service or product from, what they're looking for, what the problems are with their existing supplier, what you would need to do to persuade them to shift their business to you. All of that is interesting market research. It might not tell you how much you're going to sell, but it'll give you a sense of the market. And by the way, you might have several different market segments. You might have two different kind of groups of customers who are looking for slightly different things. You might have to sell things in a slightly different way. Next question, how do you find your customers? How are you going to do your sales and marketing? And I assume there's fairly limited resources, time and money to do that. So there's a section on that. I guess the starting point is friends and family. It's a good way, particularly if you're piloting your business, see what they think and what they're willing to pay. Beyond that, networking. It depends a lot on what kind of business you're in, but often you can go to events where your kind of best prospect are going to be there, and just talk to them. Go up to people and say, hi, I don't know many people here. You know, what line are you in? What's your involvement? What draws you here? Talk about them. And inevitably, after a minute or two, almost inevitably, they will ask about you and what you do. And you can begin to see the connection. And you might be able to recommend someone else, which is always well received. Or you might say, well, actually, there is a connection. I could perhaps help with that. How do you deal with this? So networking is a good thing. Referrals, when you've got some customers and they like you and they're happy with the product or service, then ask them, who else do you know who might be interested in this? I'm just setting up and I need to grow the business. So that's a good way of doing it. Social media, lots stronger about social media. Depends very much on the product. Facebook can work very well for the right sort of age group. Facebook tends to be older than some other social media, but it's good at getting interaction between customers. I have a friend who had a knitting business for many years. Lots of cross chat. Have you tried this? Have you done this? Look at my picture of this. And all of that helped sell her training events and kits and so forth. So you can get a conversation going. If you're a consultant, then something like LinkedIn and putting papers together, put something out there for free that shows your expertise, but also has and if you want to know more, then get in touch. That's the way of doing it. And you might want to promote by having some kind of way in, particularly if you have a service that's a bit nebulous and you're not quite sure how to sell it. It's bespoke, it can be anything. Then maybe there's a kind of package you can put together as a starter package, a free business review or a whatever it is review, or maybe it's a reduced price. For just £99 will do this particular piece of service. So you're turning your service into a kind of product. This is a particular offering, which is a way in for your potential customers. The problem with doing this kind of event is there are so many different sorts of business, then trying to say things which are relevant to many businesses can be difficult. Etsy, if you're in craft, and those kinds of platforms, of course, can be a good way of selling. So that's all the kind of marketing side. There's a lot more in there in the workbook to get that. It is free. But I'm going to move now on to the sort of more organizational and financial side. A helpful way of starting, I find, is to lay out your process. If it's a product, suppose you're making cakes, you can lay out your process step by step, from buying the ingredients to mixing them to cooking them to cooling them to packaging, all the rest of it. Every single step, lay out every part of the process. If it's a service, you might find it helpful to think of the customer path. So imagine someone going to a restaurant, which is a bit of a product and a bit of a service. What's their route? First thing they do is they phone up and book a table, probably, and then they arrive. How do you welcome them? How do you show them to the seat? Then when they arrive at their seat, what's the next step? Offer drinks, etc. So think of it stage by stage. So you've planned out what's happening. And then think about what equipment do you need for each stage of that process, and what people do you need for each stage of that process, because that will help you build up your setup costs. We're starting to think about costs. What do you need to buy before you, or hire, who do you need to hire before you actually launch the business? So that will do that. It also gives you a chance, if you do this as a table, to think about how each step could be better. You lay out the step and you think, how could we greet our customers, or how could we package our cake better than competitors? What would be a better way of doing it? Also think about, is there a way it could be done less expensively at the beginning without reducing the quality? So maybe the oven doesn't have to be brand new. It could be secondhand, it could be hired, borrowed, whatever, because keeping costs low will be important at the outset. So it gives you an opportunity to think through all those different stages. Now might be a good point also to think about a risk analysis. So what can go wrong? What are the worst things? What would really cause the business to fail? What if the sales didn't come in quickly enough? And then how can we reduce that risk? But that's something to think through, probably throughout. That then starts to get us onto costs. We thought about setup costs, but what about startup costs? Because the two are not the same. Startup costs include the fact you'll probably make a loss in the first few months, or maybe even the first couple of years of your business, and that needs to be added to the finances that you need. I think it's really helpful to separate out two sorts of costs. I know this gets technical for some people, but bear with me. It's really quite straightforward. And I'm not an accountant. I don't even especially enjoy this kind of thing, but I found it really helpful. Think about what the fixed costs are and the variable costs are. So fixed costs are, if you like, the costs of being. They're the costs you have to pay even if you don't sell a bean. So if you're hiring a premises, you're going to have to pay that rent even if you sell nothing in 1 month. And actually, if you're having to hire someone from the outset, full-time or whatever it is, that's a fixed cost because you can't get rid of them that quickly, and you're going to pay that person even if in that month you don't sell anything. So in the short term, that's quite a fixed cost. Set that on one side, and I'll explain why this is important. Variable cost is the cost of doing. Fixed cost is the cost of being, of existing. Variable cost is the cost of doing, and it varies according to how much you sell. So if you're making cakes, if the more cakes you sell, then the more ingredients you'll need to buy. And if you sell twice as many cakes, you'll need twice as many ingredients. So the costs varies according to how many cakes you're making. And what's important is to know what the total variable costs are. So when you supply a cake to someone and maybe you're selling it for £5, you need to know how much in direct costs it costs you. Because if you're selling it at less than that direct cost, you're making a loss, and you might as well stay in bed. And you need to know what that point is. It is really important. And it's surprising how often people don't know exactly. And they say, well, friend, I'll sell it to you for £3. But if it's cost you £4, you're stuffed. You need to know that you're actually giving them a present, if you see what I mean. It's also important because anything above, let's say that the costs are £4 for making a cake, then anything above that starts to contribute to fixed costs. So if you are selling it for £5, you've got £1 to go towards your rent and your fixed costs. So you can start to work out how many cakes you need to sell in order to completely cover your fixed costs. And you may work out that you'll need to sell 200 cakes a month, or, for example, to cover your fixed costs at an average of £2 gross profit. That's the difference between the selling price and the variable cost, gross profit per cake. But you might want to vary the price. You might want to charge a lower price to shops so that they can put their markup on, and a higher price direct. And as long as the average is over the £2, then you know that you're okay. So knowing what your variable cost is and your fixed cost is really important, to know that you're not being stupid and actually losing money on everything that you do. One more point on variable cost that's important. We calculate it and think that's the end of it, but that's what could be called an ideal variable cost. Unfortunately, things go wrong, and some of your cakes might get burnt, or they might go past their sell-by date and you've still got them, you haven't sold them, or they might get trodden on by your 3-year-old or whatever it is. So there will be a proportion of your cakes that are unsaleable, and you need to allow for that in the variable cost. Maybe 5% of them are unsaleable. So that needs to be built in. The same is true for services. If you're offering some kind of haircutting, for example, then you may find that some people, if you've got a booking system, people just don't turn up. So you've lost that particular appointment. If you're an accountant or if you're a consultant, you might have a series of appointments. And if there's a no-show, that's a bit like having a cake that gets burnt. It's wasted. So you need to allow for those factors. And then as you start to do the sums, this is all before you've set up the business, you're still trying to work out, predict the future. Think about what your sales are going to be in the first month, second month, third month. It will build up slowly. the reason why the business in Bethlehem nearly went bust after a year is we were too optimistic in how quickly sales would build. It took much longer than we thought. And that's quite common for that. We need to think about what happens if it doesn't build up quite so quickly. What can we do about it? And all of that then builds into cash flow. And for some people, cash flow then sparks sort of fear into their hearts, and they worry about it. But it's very straightforward. So I have recently opened a bank account for the new charity 10 Transformational Enterprise Network, and I can tell you what the December bank statement looked like. I had to send a PDF to the HMRC to register for gift aid, so I know what it looks like, and you can imagine a bank statement. At the top of it, it says how much money there was at the beginning of the month, and then it says how much money went out and how much money came in and how much was left at the end of the bank, at the end of the month. That's my bank statement for December. I can also imagine what my bank statement for January will look like. I know how much there was at the beginning of January. That's carried forward from the end of December. So that's a good starting point. I've got a pretty good idea of what money is going to come in January, and a reasonable idea what's going out in January. So I can make a forecast of what I think will be left in the bank account at the end of January. And that's my cash flow forecast for January. I just made an estimate of what my bank account will look like. February is slightly more difficult to estimate, but I can still pretty good idea of what's going to go into the bank account at the beginning of February, what's coming out, what's going in, what will be left at the end of February, and so on. That's my February cash flow forecast. An important thing is this is cash flow. It's cash going in and out. It's not the same as a profit or loss. So if you have a business where you're raising an invoice and you're selling cakes to a retailer and you've written your invoice, 50 cakes, £5 each, that invoice might not be paid till a month or even longer after you have sent it to the customer. So you book that invoice, you put that invoice in, not for the month in which you issue it, but for the month when you think it will be paid, when money actually comes into the account. And the same with money going out. So it's a forecast of really what's going in and out. And the reason why it's important, probably two reasons. One is, as you set up the business, you will expect to, most people should expect to make a loss for the first few months because sales are building up slowly. You've got these big fixed costs which are not being fully covered by all your sales. So it helps you figure out how much money you will need to start the business. So maybe you've got £1,000 in setup costs, but you're going to make a loss of £500 in the first month and £200 in the second month, and you break even the third month. So you'll need the £1,000 setup costs, but plus the 500 plus the 200, so you'll need 1,700. And actually, things always take longer and cost more than you think, as a general principle. So assume it might be more than that, and I would say you shouldn't start that business unless you can get your hands on at least £2,500, £3,000. Do you see what I mean? It's useful from that point of view. It's also useful because you can see how your business is progressing in relation to your expectation. So if you make a bigger loss in January than you thought you were in whatever the first month than you thought, then you can start to figure out how you can change that. Maybe you will need to borrow more money. How can you do that before you get to a crisis point? Or how can you generate more sales? So that's why cash flow is important. That's section 7 on all of this. From all of that, you can work out whether you're making a profit. So you're selling at more than the variable costs. That's your gross profit, which you can put towards your fixed costs. And hopefully, your business idea will be generating more money than your fixed and your variable costs. But that isn't quite the end of the story. You've got a net profit, that's great, but there are some other costs that need to be met. Firstly, your salary, which isn't necessarily included in the costs. When I started our technology company 20 years ago, we didn't actually pay ourselves for 2 years. I continued to work as a consultant part-time to cover the costs. So most people won't include their salary at the beginning. That's that's the profit at the end of the year that will take out. So you'll need to have enough to cover your salary. If you need to take money out of the business, then you'll need to think about or build it into the cash flow. What do you have to have just to exist, and build that into the whole business plan. Then if you're taking out any loans, if you've got interest, that will come out of your net profit. And then you will need to think about replacement of your kit. You've bought a computer in part of your setup costs, but you'll probably need to replace it if it's a laptop, in 5 years or whenever. And rather than have a bill for £1,000 in 5 years' time, it's much better to set aside £200 every year so that you have the money in your account to pay for the laptop. And after all, that's part of the cost. It's cost you £200 worth of laptop in your first year, as it were, to use it. So you need to build that to the cost. So there are other costs that you need to include. So you've done all your sums. You haven't set up the business yet, but you've worked out who your competitors are, who your customers are, what your price is. Yes, something I was going to say on price. I'll just go back a little bit. Price strategy. I said don't undercharge. Think carefully about price. Some businesses you can make more money by cutting the price a little bit. If you're a petrol retailer, you can cut your price by a couple of pence, and it will probably mean you'll massively increase sales because it's something that where people are looking for the cheapest price. But if you're a hairdresser, then can you imagine? Cheapest hairdresser in town, 50% off. Is that going to attract people? Probably not. People are looking for something different. So actually a higher price may generate much better cash flow. That's an aside that I meant to mention. So you've worked out your costs, you've worked out your revenue, and whether you're making enough money to cover all the costs. Do you start? Well, it might be clear cuts. This is going to be a nicely profitable business. Terrific. Let's start it. Or it might be very clear cut that there just isn't enough money in it. Sometimes that's because it's a very particular product that doesn't have a big market and it's just not enough. You need several products. You need to add other income streams or other products or services. Sometimes it's just, sorry, it actually wasn't a great idea in the first place. It just isn't. There are some really good people out there selling it and it's very difficult to compete with them. So it may be, let's start again with a different idea. Or it may be that it's a bit marginal, and that's when you can think about, have I set the right price? Can I develop other income streams? Can I reduce my costs? Do I need to buy all this kit? Can I hire it or borrow it or get it secondhand, whatever? Instead of hiring someone full-time, could I hire someone on a self-employed basis so I only pay for the hours I'm using off their time? There are other ways to make a marginal business more reliable. The last bits in section 2 are to do with business structure, and mostly have a look at it, get hold of the workbook. But the kind of key thing, the key difference is between self-employment, which is called a sole trader, or a partnership, which is similar, or a business, a company, not a business, they're all businesses, a company. Company is sometimes called a corporation, which is from the same root as corpse, it's a body. And the difference is, if you're self-employed, you and the business are one and the same thing. And if you upset someone and they take you to court and they want to sue you, then it's you they're suing and you lose potentially your house or whatever it is. You and the business, the same thing. If you set up a company, a corporation, that is legally a separate body. And so if you upset a customer, then they will sue the corporation, the company, not you personally. And it might make the company bankrupt, but you're slightly separate. It's actually not quite as straightforward, as clear-cut as that, in that if you're self-employed, you can take out professional indemnity insurance to cover you for being sued. If you're providing advice and you make a mistake, then that will cover most of that cost. And similarly, if you're running a corporation, you are still, as a director, you can still be taken to court for being criminally negligent and all sorts of other things. So it's slightly more complicated than that. Then, of course, there are various structures for charities, social enterprises. Transformational Enterprise Network is one of the newer structures, charitable incorporated organisation, which is simpler than the old way of being a company and a charity at the same time. Take a look at the book. It's got more detail. It also has information about how to name your company and some thoughts on that. Final section, as we're getting towards time, is about funding and business planning and all of that. There are some templates at mindyourownbusiness.uk for a business plan and for cash flow. Funding, obviously the best source is you, your friends, your family, and you'll realise there are various people that will lend you money. For a bigger business, they might be interested in equity. That's the Dragon's Den type thing, that they'll give you a certain amount of money for 20% of the business. So they own part of the business, they're sharing the risk with you. The most exciting thing, and I'll pretty much end with this, is the new thing that's happened is crowdfunding, things like Kickstarter. So, in the old days, you say, I want to develop this amazing new product, who can lend me some money? And you talk to your family and you start to produce it. Now you can say, I've got this amazing product. It will cost me £10,000 to develop it. And I'm going to sell this thing at £10 each. So if enough people, if 1,000 people can offer me £10 on Kickstarter, then I'll have the money to develop this thing. And at the end of the year, I'll send you your £10 worth of product that I've now produced. And if you reach that target of £10,000, Kickstarter then take the money from the people that put money in, and you got your 10 grand to make this product and distribute it. So it's like you've got the funding and your initial customer base all at once, right at the beginning. And there have been some amazing companies. Pebble watches, smart watches came out of that. They raised millions through Kickstarter. You can also do it with charities. My former business colleague, Richard Gamble, started the amazing Eternal War of Answered Prayer with a Kickstarter campaign. If you can provide this amount of money, if it was 10 quid, you can have one of the million bricks, which is an answered prayer. And if you can contribute a higher amount, then you get invited to the launch party and so on. So you can do it for raising money for charity. It's just amazing. The internet means we have access to the whole world in the same way as multinational companies. I think I will end up with one final comment, which is if God is calling you to go into business, go for it. It is a ministry, but be different. What's the difference with a Christian business? I hope it's integrity. It's making moral decisions, not decisions that will make you more money, turning down that bribe or whatever it is. And secondly, relationships, that everyone from the janitor to the most important customer is treated with respect, and you get to know them and your staff and your customers. Hopefully that will model something different and be salt and light in the workplace. Thank you for sitting through all of the spiel of information. This is hours and hours of training, trying to condense it into a very, very short period of time. But I'm done, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Amazing, Jerry. Thank you so much. I think you've given us such an amazing overview and detail as well. There was a lot in there, and I know people will be taking notes and probably checking out your website. Can you remind us what your website was that you mentioned?
So Mind Your Own Business is on mindyourownbusiness.uk. The resources tab has got lots of other information and free download and stuff. You can also actually access it through 10community.net, which is the charity. And in due course, if you're watching this as a recording in a year's time, you might find that Mind Your Business has moved into a subsection of community.net. Just future-proofing this.
Oh, that's brilliant. Christina says in the chat, this is a great session. Thanks, Jerry. I think there was so much detail there that was just so helpful. And I think sometimes to have somebody to walk you through all of the steps is just so key. Jerry, I'd love to ask you just a couple of questions as we close. Sure. And one of them is just from a church perspective. I love what you said there about business being ministry. That's something we normally go, yeah, I agree. But I wonder if you could talk or speak into a little bit. How could church leaders, or just in a church context, almost create that sort of culture? And what can churches do to help release business and celebrate? Because there's a lot of emphasis in the church on the church, which we understand why that happens. But I'd love to, maybe that'll be a super helpful thing for church leaders.
Yeah. And I think, let me say first, I think entrepreneurs need to be part of the church. In my technology company, we made it accountable to our 3 church leaders, 3 partners church leaders.
Wow.
I think that's it, because we saw it as part of the church. So entrepreneurs need the church. There are lots of temptations as business people, and we need to, I've got an accountability partner, or you may find it more helpful to have an accountability group. So we need the church. I also think the church needs entrepreneurs, and potentially being controversial, churches are often run by people who are essentially pastors, who are concerned about how people there at the church feel as a sort of first thing. And in terms of the fivefold ministry, entrepreneurs are often the apostles, and tend to be risk takers. Church, institutional church is risk averse, and we need risk takers in the mix to say, hey, let's try this. You need these entrepreneurial gifts to spread the word, basically. That's not quite the answer to your question. I think it would be great if church leaders gave opportunities to pray for, just to recognize business people. It's not a hierarchy with the missionaries and ministers, and then the teachers, and then the nurses, and then the whatever. Get business people out there, find out what they do, pray for them. That would be a good step. And can I also make a plug for, look at BizMin, Paul Bulkley, brilliant course, Business as Ministry, which really kind of plugs this perspective, and I think is a very from God course. And I hope there'll be versions for church members and church leaders to really understand what it's about. Some great examples from Joseph, and Proverbs 31, which we think of as, the perfect wife. But if God is the husband and we are the partner, that's a great example of entrepreneurship. So, and there are so many parables. Jesus was a business person. He was cutting deals with suppliers and customers. He was the elder son in the family business. I know what that's like in the Middle East. Hence lots of parables about business. So, and we know in the past, Victorian Christian entrepreneurs, and through to the present day with people like Arthur Rankin and many, that's last century, but today's, the entertainer, locally a guy called Mark Mitchell Motors, just amazing examples of Christians in business. Sorry, that was a very long answer to your question.
That's brilliant. I think what I'm hearing from you is it's just about creating some focus, isn't there, within the church space, where it's celebrated. It's not seen as separate, but it's really integrated into the life of the church. I think that's brilliant. Jerry, have you always known that you would be involved, in business from an entrepreneurial perspective, or is this something that's developed over time?
I started a rat food business at school because there was a craze on pet rats, 100% margin. As a teenager, I just wanted to make pots of money, but God had other ideas. There isn't into it now, but I became a Christian, and God had this agenda: money, sex, and power. And I could have become a money addict. God had to teach me how to define money by giving it away and taking a different approach. And then everything, learn to. I think I had to learn to possess money without being possessed by it. So it's been an amazing ride, really. But I know that God has called me to this ministry, whether it's church planting, I planted a congregation at one point, or setting up a social enterprise. It's all the same thing. It's great fun. Give me a blank sheet of paper and a vision to buy into, and I'll make it happen. And then I'll probably get bored after 3 years and want to find someone else to take it on. So that's my little bit of the body. And can I say, anyone who's listening, if I can help them with their project, then you can connect with me through Mind Your Own Business or 10, and I'll do what I can. I hope I'm a resource that's of some value.
Brilliant, Jerry. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much. I think you've helped so many people today. Great comments coming in on the chat. So bless you. Thank you. And we'll say goodbye to you.